Hey, good afternoon. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. Today, I'm really thrilled to have with me as my guest Mike Sacksteder, who's a partner at Fenwick. Mike, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So, Mike, you have what perceive as one of the more interesting backgrounds, and I see that before you went to law school, you were a TV news reporter. So, I wanted to ask you, how did you get into that interesting profession?
So I came of age sort of right after the Watergate era,
Mm.
and the Woodward and Bernstein era. And it
Yeah,
was a time when, that was what kids wanted to do. They wanted to
interesting.
sort of be the check on government and, inform the public. And so I, from a fairly early age, had decided that I was going to study journalism in college. Ended up doing that, and somehow ended up in television
Huh.
doing that, and did it for about 10 years before I went to law school.
That's amazing. Well, tell me, what kinds of stories did you cover and what was it like?
About everything. I was sometimes a general assignment reporter. Sometimes my job was anchor slash reporter. And then in the last couple of jobs of my career, I sort of gravitated towards state government.
Hmm.
So I worked in Maine, and covered the state house there. And then I did the same thing in Indianapolis, in Indiana. But, as a TV reporter, you have to do all kinds of things.
Yeah,
And
right.
yeah, and so, everything from covering, governmental hearings to, going to the airport on the day before Thanksgiving to talk about how crowded it is.
I see. So you don't have like a specialty. It's like whatever the story comes up and they just assign it to the reporter. Is that how it works?
Most of the time, yes, but you have a beat as well. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was, I would hang around the state house in Maine or in Indiana, talk to contacts there, find out what the stories were. But at the same time, the station has a certain amount of time they have to fill every night, and so they would ask me to cover other things as well.
What kind of qualifications does it take to when you applied for that job? What kind of qualifications did you need for that job?
I'm not sure. I you have to be able to write and speak clearly,
Uh-huh.
and be comfortable appearing on the air, which you do an awful lot.
Yeah.
But other than that, I mean, people come from all kinds of backgrounds. I happen to have a degree in journalism, but it's not certainly the only qualification or the only way to do it.
Did you do any reporting in college or anything, like for the school
I I
radio?
did some. Yeah, I did. There was, as part of classes, there was a college radio station that you did stories for and did newscasts for. And then my senior year in college, I got hired by the local radio station in town and did newscasts for them.
Hmm.
And thought maybe I'd just keep doing that, but then I somehow got hired by a TV station when I graduated. So
Well, did you want to be a news reporter, or did you ever think about being just a regular journalist, write magazine articles and stuff like that?
it just was the place that I fell into.
Oh,
There was a professor at my college who was very good teacher and very good at conveying the excitement of sort of the immediacy of television news.
huh.
And so I eventually sort of halfway through college, you focus on one aspect of journalism or another.
Yeah.
And I decided to go to broadcast rather than the print journalism.
Huh. Well, was it a fun job? What'd you think? You did it for 10 years, so it must have been pretty fun.
There are certainly fun aspects to it. I also have not done it for more than 25 years. So, it was something that I'm glad I did, and I'm glad I don't do anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
You get to learn a lot, which I do as an attorney as well. You get to see, the major events of the day. You get to be there, covering, you know, the elections and court cases that have sort of a very high profile and other things that are going on, that people want to know about, and you're sitting in the front row.
Yeah.
So that was fun. But after a while, I decided I wanted to do something else.
Hmm. Well, what's the worst part about that job?
Well, I mentioned being at the airport on the night before Thanksgiving, and that's certainly one of them.
Yeah.
And you can be in situations that are a little bit dicey. I was at sort of protests that looked like they were going to get violent potentially.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to watch your back very carefully in those situations. But, TV doesn't stop on the holidays or on the weekends. And so somebody has to do it. And sometimes I was eating Thanksgiving dinner off the dashboard of a news truck.
What's your most memorable experience during your 10 years as a reporter? If you had to pick one, what would you say?
That's hard to select. I think it was the time when President George Bush the First made fun of me.
Oh,
Yeah, kind of gently. He was a kind and gentle kind of a guy. And when I was working in Portland, Maine, I was sort of the political beat reporter, and he had his vacation home in Kennebunkport, Maine. And it was the time when he was president in the early 90s. And he held a news conference for local journalists. And so the national people weren't allowed to ask questions, and just local people came in and asked him questions. And it was just before it was probably 1991.
Okay.
And I asked him which of the Democratic candidates he would least like to face. And he said it was a fair question. But then he said, but he's not going to answer it. And then he compared it to a Saturday Night Live skit where Dana Carvey, who used to play the first President Bush, was doing a news conference, and the reporters kept asking him more and more questions until they were asking him for the nuclear launch codes. And so he compared my question about who he least wanted to face in the election from the Democratic side to asking him for the launch codes.
Oh, funny. So what made you decide to finally leave that profession?
People don't believe this, but it just struck me one day. I was literally, my then girlfriend, now my wife, was having a dispute with a landlord. And I thought to myself, if I were a lawyer, I could write that guy a letter and help her out. And I thought, why not try to be a lawyer?
And just like that.
So I was working in Indianapolis, and I went to the local, the local law school in Indianapolis, and spoke to the admissions director. And she said, well, there's this test you need to take, and you better get ready to take it, because this was in December of 1993. The test was in February of 94, and that was kind of my last chance to take it that year. So I took the LSAT, and I was in law school at Northwestern in August of 94. So
interesting.
So I just suddenly one day decided that I'd done enough journalism and I wanted to try something new.
Yeah, interesting. When you are a journalist, though, aren't you kind of semi-famous? People recognize you at the airports and at restaurants because they always see you on TV. Isn't that the case?
A lot more than as a lawyer, definitely. Yeah, I mean, people would come up and, they'd sort of mispronounce my name. It's kind of hard to pronounce. And it was nice. It was gratifying. Normally people were pretty polite about it. And occasionally they would call the station and tell you need a haircut or something like that. But people were generally, there's a lot of sort of connection when you're working in that field between the community and your audience and yourself. And so it felt nice when people did that. It wasn't like an everyday occurrence, but it happened.
Well, you've obviously had a very successful career as a lawyer now. Do you think any of that stuff you did as a journalist, do you think it was helpful in any way, or what do you think?
I can't think of a better prior career to have in what I do now.
Oh, interesting.
I do intellectual property litigation, and I'm a trial lawyer and a litigator. And my job, and it has been since I started 26 years ago doing law, has been to take a big mound of information and boil it down to the important stuff, and then convey it to somebody else in a way that is engaging and interesting and persuasive. That's what I do as a lawyer, and it's what I did as a journalist for a long time. And the other thing is that being able to ask questions. My favorite thing as a lawyer, one of my favorite things is cross-examination, either in trial or in a deposition.
Mm.
And a lot of the sort of the skills that I learned over 10 years of every day asking people questions has really helped me in the way that I handle, the questions that I ask people in depositions and on the stand at trial.
Yeah, that's interesting. I can totally see that. So I'm guessing when you went to law school, you were probably thinking, wow, this journalism education is actually coming in pretty handy.
Law school isn't a lot like practicing. And I think most lawyers would tell you that. So it became clearer and clearer to me. And frankly, as I became a lawyer and started practicing, that's when it really became clear. It's like, oh, this is exactly like what I used to do, except the time scale is usually a lot longer. I usually had to get 2 or 3 stories on the air every day that I was working. And here I just got a scheduling order today in a case, and the trial's set for about halfway through 2025. So you get a little bit more time to plan things out in this field, but certainly the kind of a lot of the core skills have transferred. Right?
Do you have any former colleagues that are still in journalism that you knew or worked with back then?
I do. Yeah, I mean, a lot of them. A number of people. I have friends, although one of them just recently retired, who worked for Fox News and then for CNN and for sort of every other media outlet there is, and some people who just stayed in local news the whole time and were sort of in local news. There are people who become institutions in sort of a local community, and I have friends who have been that person for 30, 35 years. And when I knew them, we were relatively young and just starting out, but now they're kind of the person that everybody knows and everybody.
Yeah, interesting. Well, prior to making that decision to law school at the time, what was your career plan at the time? Were you thinking you were going to be a journalist for your career, or what were you thinking at that time?
It was something that was certainly in my mind. I was in Indianapolis. Probably the next step was Chicago. I was in my very early 30s at the time I made the transition to another career. That's sort of the way it goes. You move. I started in a very, very small town in southern Illinois when I was 21 years old. And you move up to larger markets throughout. Until you either find the one that you've clicked with enough that you want to stay there the rest of your career, or you move up to another one. And sort of the way that people think about a journalism career or a TV news career is to sort of move up and maybe I'll get to network someday. But I decided that goal wasn't for me, and that there was something else that I wanted to do instead.
It's so funny how in life, like, who knows what, how careers go, but, thank goodness for that pesky landlord.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. If he'd been more reasonable, then I would maybe not be here, which is funny. The little things that change the path of your career, because I honestly hadn't thought about it, even though my grandfather and my uncle and my great grandfather were all lawyers, but that wasn't a career that I had focused on. And then I started looking at it and decided that it was just fascinating.
Yeah, and it all worked out so well.
Feels like it. I'm very happy with it.
Well, Michael, I really appreciate your taking the time. As I said, I've interviewed a lot of lawyers, but I've never met anyone who is a TV reporter. So it was great to have you on air, and thank you for taking the time.
Happy to talk to you.
This is Richard Hsu and Mike Sacksteder. Thanks.